Welcome everybody to the July 24th, 2017 meeting of Kubernetes SIG service catalog. Aaron, would you share your screen so we can follow the agenda as you take notes?
Yeah, give me 1 sec. Okay, can anyone not see this?
I can see it. Okay, so first up, we discussed in the architecture SIG this morning, or I guess early afternoon, Eastern time, the situation with PodPreset. So we got a decision out of that to move the settings API group wholesale to Service Catalog API server. And that also implies that we will implement PodPreset with an initializer instead of an emission controller. For anybody that doesn't know already, there's long been a desire to have emission controllers that are not compiled into the Kubernetes core, and that's what an initializer is. So Google has generously given us Sunil to make that happen and to help get PodPreset to a beta level in Kubernetes 1.8 timeline. So that's the update on that. I do think that we should have perhaps in tomorrow's design meeting a discussion of what that means vis-a-vis PodPreset integration and catalog going to beta. But we have a very full agenda today, so I think we can discuss that tomorrow or later in the week. Next up, Aaron, CRDs.
Can someone finish the notes for PodPreset then?
I will give it a shot.
Okay. So I think most have seen issue 987 that has discussion on migrating from TPR storage backend to the CRD storage backend. I'm going to share context here very briefly on why then Deis built this integration. So for those who don't know, the issue we had was we had customers who didn't want to hook up service catalog directly to an etcd, wherever that might have been. And at the time, I think the options were basically the same as they are now. That is either the etcd that Kubernetes core talks to, or to just throw an etcd somewhere into the cluster. So we built TPRs as a storage backend. Now, of course, TPRs are going to be, they're deprecated now, and they're going to be, I believe, eliminated in Kubernetes 1.8. So this discussion started as in the issue as should we migrate to CRDs? I think the obvious answer there is yes. We should migrate off of TPRs to something. The requirement that we have, to be clear, is not we must use CRDs, but we would like to have something that doesn't require an etcd to be kind of sprayed onto the cluster and used exclusively by service catalog. So that's where the CRD discussion left off. I know that there is some interest from Google and from Atlassian that they may, one or both of those groups may want to implement a CRD storage backend. I'm going to have a discussion with at least Mikhail. Mikhail, are you on the call now? I believe I did not see you.
I don't think so.
Okay.
But I can speak for him.
Okay, great. So I was going to have a discussion, Neil, with at least him, but I think you were going to be there as well. That was going to be in the early evening, my time, I think the morning, your time,
Mhm.
about how to proceed here with implementing CRD backend support. So with that, I will leave it. And Neil, if you want to fill stuff in, please go for it.
Well, I think that both you and Google's use case and our use case is pretty much the same. That like the reasoning for using TPRs or CRDs is pretty much just not willing to manage a separate etcd cluster and just reusing the same etcd as being used by core Kubernetes, but not directly probably, but through the API. So yeah, I don't see any extra requirements for using CRDs or any other resource. We don't care what it is. Like switch from TPRs to CRD is just, for us, is just mostly just renaming, providing the same value. So I think that it should be also straightforward because it's based on TPRs. So I don't see even any other options than using CRD.
Yeah. So one question that I have about this is whether we can actually do this right now and wholly migrate onto CRDs, or whether we need to keep TPR support around, which support is being very generous, right? It's more like it's there and you can try it. But I wouldn't say that we offer support on it. I wonder if the Microsoft, Google, and Atlassian folks on the call can say whether they feel we can ditch TPR or whether we need to keep TPR support in at least until we have CRD support, or if we need some period where they're etcd, TPR, and CRD are all technically have pathways in the code associated with them.
So what we can do, and what I think we should do, is leave TPR in the state it is now, which is just declared in docs as alpha. And we can concurrently build CRD support in. And then when 1.8 comes out, we can declare TPR support deprecated and only refer to it as in alpha in the 1.6 and previous docs. Sorry, 1.7 and previous documentation. And that would then cover the use case for people running 1.6, 1.7 and before. And of course, tell them again that that's alpha, and then covers the 1.8 plus users for CRD. And the only work involved there, of course, is to just add the CRD support.
Yeah, so we are going to have this problem again because CRDs, while more stable than TPRs, are still not designed as a data store. So when I've spoken to API machinery type folks, and maybe Walter, you might know more about this than I do, we have discussed like a basically totally opaque blob resource that would be suitable as a data store for aggregated APIs. And obviously that doesn't exist yet, but I think the desire in the community certainly seems to be strong enough that it's arguable that we should build such a thing, especially if the API machinery maintainers are not, I think that CRD is unsuitable as a long-term place to store data for aggregated APIs. So it's worth considering what our deprecation strategy is going to be. And I think this is perhaps another area where we're out in front of Kubernetes, because I don't think anybody else has any concern like this about supporting different data stores.
Yes. So I feel kind of strongly here that would be great, but I feel that the deprecation policy we have that I just suggested right now is just kind of good enough. And I don't want to.
I'm not suggesting that we block anything on this. I'm
Okay.
only saying that we will have
So
another sibling that we'll have to think about in the future. That's all.
yeah, so that's great. I plus one that. But I do feel like we have enough on our plate in terms of stuff that we're taking on from the community. And of course, PodPreset is the biggest example there. That I'd rather just implement CRDs next to the existing TPR implementation and then carry that pattern forward if and when we get the opaque blob API. And that would be great, of course.
Yeah, if I just quickly adding on, I have definitely already seen a very alpha version of a blob presentation go past my desk. So it is definitely something the community is looking at. And if you're interested, I can try to have a quick overview of it ready for next time.
That would be awesome. Sorry, I will plus one the implement CRD next to TPR. I prefer not to carry TPR forever, but we can sort that out at a later date.
Do we want to use the client Go for this? I think someone said, I haven't looked at it, but someone said that we're using REST API now for working with TPRs, not client Go types.
Walter, what is the current best mechanism to work with CRD types from a client standpoint?
Actually, that's a really good question. There's two guys in the office, Sunil and Sean, who are looking at this right now. I don't know the latest status, but I would say that we want to get moving on CRD because TPR is supposed to be deprecated, and there's already discussions about which release it's going to be removed in.
Yeah, which means that if we are using client Go, once we migrate rebase onto 1.8, we just won't have TPRs at all. So I think we can sync up with this change. So before we rebase onto 1.8, we should probably ditch TPR.
I would be fine with ditching at that point. Really, the strategy can just say, if you are 1.7 and prior and you want to use TPR for some reason, whatever it might be, then you're restricted to versions X and previous.
I don't want to necessarily get into a discussion, but I was a little bit distracted during the call. You guys were talking about this notion of a blob store. I'm just out of curiosity, what would be the difference between a blob store versus an object store?
One of the things I think is just like, for example, now if you're using TPRs or CRDs, you can use kubectl, and like all the objects are exposed as raw objects, and like anyone can access the like data beneath the not using the service catalog API server. So I think that it would be useful to hide all these objects and expose them only through service catalog.
So I think one of the major facets that the API machinery group feels that CRD is not good enough as a long-term location for just arbitrary serialized data. I believe is that they do not. They feel that the versioning support in CRD is not strong enough to be the basis for arbitrary API data.
Yeah, the other things I would add to that are, one, etcd is really not designed for large objects. And we've been actually investigating a couple of large objects-based stuff. So we would like to keep control of what's actually in etcd to make sure that we can get good behavior out of Kubernetes. So that's one very important piece. The second is that we sort of feel like as people begin to scale, it's going to start becoming more and more important to have multiple data stores so that we can isolate certain behaviors. And we can certainly see where you don't necessarily want Kubernetes affecting service catalog or vice versa in their behaviors, and isolating their data systems is going to be important towards that goal.
Yeah, so another idea that I've thrown around much longer term is providing an option in Service Catalog's API server to use external storage outside of Kubernetes. That's something that's kind of in the hobby ideation phase in my head, but I wanted to throw it out there for someone else to think about as well. If you have ideas in that space, just DM me and let's talk.
I mean, that sounds reasonable, but the other thing is, even on the Kubernetes side, we'd like to give a standard API for doing exactly what you just said, so that we can do it consistently and things can migrate easily from AWS to Azure or whatever your cloud provider happens to be.
So Aaron, just to circle back around to the need for something, for the need for TPRs to begin with, if I remember correctly, I thought during one of the first face-to-faces, you guys said you needed it because you wanted the service catalog stuff to run, I want to say outside the Kubernetes cluster, but at least not right next to the Kubernetes core processes or something like that. And there might be like firewall issues or something in the way that prevents you from getting, no? Okay, what was the issue? Because
No, we wanted to run it inside of the cluster, but we didn't want to have it share the Kubernetes core etcd. And we also didn't want to have to basically plop down an etcd on cluster just for the service catalog API server.
right, I understand the latter part because you don't want to manage a separate etcd, but can you elaborate on why you don't want to use the same etcd? Because in this model that Kubernetes is heading towards, where it's separate API servers, they're breaking up their core into separate little components, this seems like it just falls into yet another component. Why would Service Catalog be different in that picture?
Just because opening up network access for a pod to the core etcd was extremely problematic for some of our customers.
You also can't do it on a lot of clouds. Like on GKE, you do not get access to the etcd.
Yeah.
Does that mean that?
So Doug, let me just clarify real quick. It's the problem that we've never had the problem of saying, hey customer, we want you to allow Service Catalog to store data on etcd. The problem has always been, we want you, the customer, to open up network access directly to etcd.
Oh, you mean as opposed to going to the API server?
Yeah, so TPR was the solution, because it's always been okay to say this API server is going to store stuff on the core etcd.
Okay, okay. Sorry, I completely forgot. It's direct access to etcd as opposed to the API server. I forgot about that piece. Okay, thank you.
Yep, sure.
Okay, so it sounds like we have consensus to implement CRD and keep TPR around for the time being. And it sounds like that is good enough for somebody to go and begin working on it. I have been thinking in connection with CRDs that they were very labor intensive for Aaron. I think it would be really great if we could get someone else or some other parties multiple to make a contribution for CRD. I think Aaron's already jumped a lot of hurdles in the dark to the benefit of those who will implement such a thing. And hopefully CRD support will be much less of an unknown to write support for than TPRs. I wonder if we have anybody who is willing to raise their hand as someone who would like to work on that also has time available to work on it.
I believe someone from Google suggested in the issue that they can work on that.
I think Sunil may have been indicating that he would have cycles this quarter to work on it. I know he's not here now, so you need to follow up on that.
Yeah, I don't think that we can rely on Sunil as that person because his primary responsibility, to my knowledge, is things to do with settings API group and PodPreset.
Yeah, sorry.
There's another engineer.
Sunil is working with 2 other people on his team.
Okay.
So when I say Sunil, I mean Sunil's team.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll ping him offline about that.
Yeah, so if you look at my screen, I don't know this person's name, but this GitHub handle here said above, I think
It's
somewhere above, maybe they said that they would be willing to. And then, like I said, also, Mikhail said he wanted to talk about it later this afternoon, my time.
It looks like Nal said that he could do it.
Yes, I said that I could do it, but yeah, you can scroll down. I think it's probably one of the latest messages. Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
We Google. Yeah. So
Okay.
I don't want to have like a conflict on making this change.
So I'll tell you what, I'll take as an action item to A, figure out what party or parties are going to do this, and B, then coordinate those party or parties and help them out with whatever they need while they do it.
So I'm sure you've already done this, Aaron, but it might also be worth thinking about having done the exercise already with TPR, thinking about how the work might break down such that it could be parallelized or split up between people.
I have indeed.
Okay, excellent. I suspected as much.
So I wrote this in the issue too. I'll update in this issue notes from this discussion as well as notes from discussion with the Atlassian guys that Neil, I think you'll probably be at, and then further if I have discussions with Google, et cetera, et cetera. So
Okay.
this will be the issue of record.
Okay. So next one, I had something that I put on the agenda. I'm going to move it to the bottom because I think there are other things that are probably easier to actually get consensus on during this time. So that leaves Doug, Kubernetes name of ServiceClass and Plan.
Oh yeah, this will be easy.
I think we actually started talking about this on Thursday of last week. But go ahead.
I don't think we did. This is the idea of what to do with the fact that the service class name and the plan name might actually change from the broker when you do a refresh. And that, therefore, because those names can change, we can't use those names for the resource names inside Kubernetes. And so what the heck do we do about that? Now, the reason I added this to the agenda was because I had a proposal in there. Let me get the link to it. Hold on a sec. Here's the link to it. I don't necessarily want to go through the details right now because I think it's best for people to read it offline and think about it, but I just wanted to bring it to people's attention. And in particular, the bits I wanted to draw to people's attention are the what I consider to be the controversial bits, which are from an end user's perspective, when they actually go to create an instance, I want them to be able to reference the service and the plan by the nice human-friendly name, the changeable nice human-friendly name. But once the instance gets put into the API server, I'm proposing that we twiddle that field to be the, some unique UUID kind of a thing that's going to be the real name of the instance and plan. And I'm not, and what's controversial about that to me is this notion of the API server changing the user's data on them on the fly. That's one bit.
That breaks patch. But I think what you're going for is you want people to think about it, and perhaps we'll discuss it at length later this week.
Yeah, I just want to bring up the other controversial thing, which is dynamically generating data on the fly in response to a GET. That's something else I think is either controversial or new for Kubernetes as well. But anyway, go off and think about that, because it's going to take a lot of thinking and discussion, I'm sure.
This actually might also be something that perhaps we can discuss and then surface in the SIG architecture office hours. I am loath to invent new mechanisms here, but we should definitely discuss it.
Yeah, no, can you, Paul, while we're on the topic though, you said this is going to break patch. Can you elaborate on how it breaks patch?
So I will have to think for a moment to construct an example of exactly how it breaks it, but
because the service name field would be write once, I believe, for an instance. The plan name is updatable, I believe, but the service plan name itself, I'm sorry, the service name itself should be write once.
So in general though, like forget about patch. My most pressing point of discomfort about this is that like I would be totally fine with tooling that did this for you, but if we rely on magic in the API server, we still fundamentally have races, so that you might unintentionally couple yourself to a class that is not what you thought it was.
Okay, I think we need to explore that more, because I'm not sure I follow. Because to me, this is.
So, for example, like if you have, and honestly, I'm not sure whether Porcelain would totally solve this. So say that you allow users to post the human readable name. If they post the human readable name and at the same time a broker is being updated and like the names shuffle around so that there's now a new plan or like another plan that is renamed to the name of the old plan, but has different semantics, you might wind up with not what you thought. I'm actually extremely curious about how Cloud Foundry handles this, because they must do something similar to like the Porcelain that we've discussed, because the experience that you have as an end user is one where you are just referring to the human readable names. But that said, I also happen to remember that Cloud Foundry as a platform does not have an automatic relist interval like we do. So perhaps they don't do any don't take any preventative measures to avoid such a race, because they consider the update of a particular broker's catalog to be a manual, once in a blue moon operation.
I'm not quite sure I understand the race condition.
So the race condition is that I refer to service plan A. While I'm posting that, the controller is also relisting the broker, and the broker used to have plans A and B, and now it has plan A, B, and C, except since the names are mutable, it changed the old plan A to be the new plan B, and the old plan B to be the new plan A, and you got the new plan A when you wanted the old plan A.
Okay, that's not so much a race condition to me as much as just things change under the covers, and I don't think we can ever fix that, to be honest.
And yes, Morgan, they do all have GUIDs.
Yeah, and that's how that in some ways.
Well, they have IDs, whatever's in an ID, which we know to be also a subject of some debate.
But so Cloud Foundry does use the GUID under the covers to reference everything, but from the end user's perspective, Cloud Foundry does not necessarily avoid this exact problem, right? When you go to reference something by the human readable name, if between the time you did the query and the time you actually tried to use that human readable name, if that human readable name now points to something else, then you're going to get that something else. And I'm not sure we can necessarily even fix that either, because that's just a fact of life. If someone renames something on you and reuses that name, you're going to get the new thing, because you have no way of knowing whether they meant to point to the new thing or the old thing.
So,
Okay. So I think the takeaway here is everybody read the issue, and perhaps we can discuss it maybe tomorrow. Does that work?
Yep.
Okay.
so Doug, is the issue or is your proposal in issue 802?
Yes, the last comment in 802.
Okay.
And for those of you who missed the exciting news in the chat, master is now fixed.
Excellent. Thanks.
Thank you all for doing that.
But yeah, luckily it was just a simple missing repository issue. Thank God, nothing more serious.
What was missing?
So on Friday we merged a PR that created other architecture versions.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got it. Okay, got it. Yep.
So the robot wasn't allowed to create those on the fly.
Okay, I think we're at EOF on the names of service classes and plans. We have an action item there.
And the next one up is yours, Aaron. I believe if you want, I'll take notes while you talk to it.
Okay. Yeah, so this one, we've gone over this 3 times now. I think every time we've kind of punted. This is what should we do if someone tries to delete an instance that has bindings that reference that instance. The OSB spec doesn't currently say what to do here. That's something I'll be bringing up in the meeting tomorrow with the group.
I believe in Cloud Foundry, they actually prevent the deletion. They say that, no, you can't do that because there are bindings that are active.
Yep, you beat me to it. And the refresher here is that was going to be our default behavior. I would be hugely in favor of just doing that. Right now.
I would in a vacuum. However, I do not think that we have any place in Kubernetes where we prevent the deletion of a resource. So I think that we have to accept the delete. And perhaps what we could do is accept the delete, but then not actually do the deprovision until the bindings are all themselves deleted.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Just put it into
before Aaron.
What?
I said in before Aaron.
Yeah, in race condition. It might be a better user experience to write in a condition in the instance listing what bindings you need to delete first in order to finish deletion of the instance. But beyond that, I would say let's do that, and we can add machinery later if we want to do some sort of cascading delete.
Is there going to be any indication to the user that their delete did not actually go through?
Not on the delete, but it would be on the status field.
So they'd have to go out of the way to look for it.
Right.
Yeah, but that's with parity with all other deletion-driven behaviors in Kubernetes too, right? Like, any of these other behaviors, you don't get the delete rejected.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, namespace deletion can fail, or I've had it take days. That's the way that the reconciliation works.
Yep.
Yeah, so instance just will have a deletion timestamp set, right?
Yeah. So it'll go into finalization it will still be in finalization, but there will be a condition written down that says you can't delete this right now because the following bindings still point to it. Have the list of the binding names, and then say you need to unbind by deleting those bindings. Once you do that, then this instance will be completely deleted.
So one thing that I've just thought of is we would definitely also need to block new bindings from happening at the API server level after you had an instance that was deleted but still had active bindings. We shouldn't allow new bindings to that instance to be created.
What about updating bindings?
Sorry, didn't get that, Null.
What about updating bindings, existing bindings?
I think updating. So actually, what's the use case for updating a binding?
Oh, do we even have a request for updating binding now?
We don't. Yeah, updating a binding doesn't mean anything because you can't update the parameters on a binding currently.
Isn't that, but that's in the works, right?
No, async bindings are in the works. I don't know off the top of my head if that includes updating.
Oh,
It
okay.
doesn't. There's a separate issue for updating. I don't think it's gotten traction recently, though.
So I will say my statement was intended only to apply to new bindings, that we should reject new bindings.
So why don't we mark the question about updating existing bindings as a TBD until the spec actually supports it?
Sure.
We can decide later what we're going to do about it.
Is there a different issue for updating bindings in Service Catalog, Doug?
I think Brendan was just saying, yeah.
Oh, I
No,
missed.
so,
I think that was
sorry. That's
in reference to
for
the
the
spec.
Open Service Broker spec.
Oh, okay.
There's an issue. I don't know that there is one in the Service Catalog repo.
Is there some other way to handle a secret rotation without an update?
Nope. It's a pretty big gap in the API that a lot of people have identified.
Right. So that's in the. So let's just mark this as TBD until the spec supports it.
Doug, what's the this that we should mark as TBD?
Updating existing bindings on a deleted instance.
Gotcha.
Is this important enough? It's good for us to identify things that are important to start driving more in the Open Service Broker spec. So is this something that we should start driving more for this, or do we not care?
I thought we cared a lot about being able to rotate the credentials.
I would say it's worth bringing up, Brendan.
Okay.
But with respect specifically to issue 820,
Yep.
I don't think we need it in order to make progress.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I was asking more specifically for this because there's a lot of things that we can punt until the spec is ready, but there are also things that we should probably use to push the spec if we need to. Sounds like this is the case.
Yeah, I would agree with what Paul said, is just block new bindings for the instance. And since we don't have machinery to update bindings at all right now, because it's in marination, so to speak, in the OSB group, I think it's okay to just push forward on implementing block new bindings, do the failure on finalization that we talked about, and then go and talk to the OSB group sort of in another thread about binding in general.
I love the idea of the Kubernetes incubator org being renamed to the Kubernetes marinator.
Let's go to SIG architecture and make it happen. So, Paul, I also have a question about blocking new bindings. On the kubectl, let's say, kubectl create or whatever, would that still go through and then the new binding have a failure condition set on it?
No, I think in this case, you'd have an admission controller that just rejected the binding.
Gotcha. Alrighty. So I'll take an action item to write down the decision in number, what is this, 820.
Paul, do we have already a admission controller for new bindings which checks that there is an instance with this name or something like that?
We actually don't, as far as I know. I'm double checking now, but we certainly could use such a thing. Yeah, we do not. We only have one that checks to ensure that the Kubernetes namespace exists. So we can make a distinct issue to have an admission controller that prevents a binding from. Actually, you know what? We shouldn't have that because you might create them out of order.
Yes, that was my actual question. That like you can create binding with instance not existing, then you can delete instance, and like it could be literally in random order.
Yeah. So I think in this case, I think in this particular case, the difference would be that the admission controller that we've been talking through would look for the presence of an instance that had a deletion timestamp on it.
Okay.
But actually, that might not even be sufficient, or might be wrong for another reason. Something to think through, I guess. So who put broker update semantics on the agenda?
Before we go there, does anyone disagree with these decisions I've written down under the previous?
I don't think it's a failure condition. I think it's just a condition.
Cool. All right. EOF for me.
Okay. Who put broker update semantics?
So I did because it's still an open issue, but unfortunately I haven't had a chance to write up a concrete proposal, but just to let you guys know what the issue is. If I remember correctly, so there are two issues here. One is there are going to be cases where brokers just vanish, and we need to make sure that we can delete brokers, instances, and bindings without ever making the call out to the broker. In other words, some sort of force type option. I'm not sure we support that right now. And also we're having services and plans that just vanish when you do a refresh from the market, from the broker's marketplace. How are we going to handle those? Those may be very related to other issues we talked about, but I need to do the homework to investigate it and come up with a concrete proposal based on what's currently in our code.
Okay, I'll take an action item there to make an issue for the vanishing broker case, because I think that's a little different than broker updates. I can do that today.
That's fine. You're going to include a proposal too?
Yeah, I think for I think the proposal is just that you should be able to force delete those things.
Okay.
I'm not sure that we need necessarily anything else.
Yeah, no, I agree with that general direction. I was just going to take the time to write up a formal proposal, but if you're going to do it, go for it.
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay.
So that actually kind of relates back to the previous one that handled deprovision to an instance with bindings. We did talk overall about doing this thing called force delete. This might be the place to start its implementation.
Yep, I would agree.
So Paul, maybe you can just make that a note in your proposal.
Yeah, I think that it's probably more complicated than force delete, because we'll have to finalize the for bindings, for example. If we just force delete the bindings, something still has to go and clean up the secret. So it might be kind of tricky to reason through. Yeah. I think it's actually almost certainly more complicated than it seems on the surface. But I'll take a first pass at writing it up, and we'll just see what falls out of that.
Sounds good.
So Paul, I want to make sure I understand. Are you writing up the issue that says the broker vanishes and therefore you need to force delete everything, or are you taking the issue of the broker's still there, but the services and plans that you may reference are now gone?
I'm going to address the issue of the broker vanishes.
Okay, cool. I'll take the second one then.
All right. Who put user provided services on there?
Okay, this was mine as well. So right now, user-provided services are just like any other service. I mean, we created a user-provided broker to deal with those. And as I was going through the walkthrough and playing with Simon's plugin stuff, I did not have the greatest user experience with it. And it may seem like a minor thing, but it kind of really bugged me the more I was looking at it. And it's the fact that, one, I had to explicitly set up a broker to do it. Now, granted, an administrator might do this for me, but it just seemed really annoying to do that. And then the bigger issue for me was when I created my instance, I had to give a plan name, which makes no sense whatsoever for user-provided service because they don't have plans. So you have to put in a plan name of, quote, default. And it just felt really odd to me between those two things, and it started making me wonder whether we should follow the Cloud Foundry pattern and just have a well-defined resource called user-provided service instance or something like that. That way, they don't have to feel like they're doing something hacky or specialized. It's just, here's a special type of service instance, and it's the same kind of user experience that Cloud Foundry gives you, and it doesn't seem to be one that feels cumbersome. I wanted to bring it up and get some discussion going on it.
The whole thing with the UPS broker does seem janky to me too. I am not necessarily against first class support for user provided services. I doubt they are a must have for beta. They seem more like a GA thing to me.
Yeah, I don't have a huge preference. Obviously, I'd rather it sooner rather than later just so we can work out the design details, but it would be additive. So I don't necessarily have a problem with pushing it out. I guess before I go off and actually write a more formal proposal, though, whatever time frame that might be in, I would like to have people think about this for a day or so. So maybe tomorrow, people come back and say whether they, in general, think it's probably the right way to go to have a specialized resource, or whether no, the current approach is the right way to go. Just have people think about it for 24 hours. I prefer that.
So Doug,
Yeah,
when you say specialized resource, you mean something kind of more specific than an instance?
It's sort of like a specialized instance, yeah.
Gotcha, cool.
So what does Cloud Foundry do for user provided services in bindings?
Basically,
You have to give a plan?
No, basically they have a specialized, for lack of a better phrase, resource where you say basically create user provided service and you give it credentials, or you give it, whatever information you need to create it. And then you create bindings off of that.
So I'm wondering a bit about how the, I guess, user experience would be as far as like doing kubectl and whatnot. Because if you did get instances, would it list the special user provided services under that?
Yes.
Okay, so it'd have to aggregate them. And then same for like bindings, you would specify the user provided service name, but it has to know that it's not actually an instance, it's a special resource. So there's some sort of stuff under the covers.
Yeah, I know this isn't the right phrase to use for Golang, but basically I'm kind of envisioning user provided services being not quite a subclass because it doesn't have plan, but it's similar in that sense. Or maybe actually it's the other way around. Maybe a normal instance is more like a subclass of user provided service because it goes one step further by adding a plan to it. But maybe I shouldn't even phrase it that way. That might just confuse the matter.
So then, Doug, when you do a kubectl get service class, these things would also show up there just without plans?
No, because they are not services that you create instances from. You would be doing a kube control create user provided service type.
Okay, would there be a relevant way to list the user provided services available from the catalog?
You would not be asking for the catalog at that point. What you'd be asking for is give me the list of instances of services, and this would show up in that list the same way MongoDB would show up in that list.
Gotcha. All right, I'll read through your proposal.
What? Not a proposal yet.
Your issue.
Yeah, there you go. Yes.
What's the use case for user-provided services compared to typical brokers and stuff?
Right. So the use case that I'm most familiar with is the one where you have credentials for a third-party service already, but then you want to access it using the normal service broker mechanisms, right? So
It's like you want to put your post-it note into VCAP services.
yeah, basically, yeah. I wanted to tell the system, hey, don't try to provision this service already. Here are the credentials. I'm giving it to you up front, but go ahead and let me bind to it the same way I would normally.
Well, it's kind of more.
But there is still service broker and other objects, right? So you just manually create instance and
you manually create the instance. You manually create the instance, but you do not have a service broker involved.
There's kind of more than that too, right? I've seen this thing used a ton for things that an operator wanted to be, quote, multi-tenant. So they spin up the Mongo or whatever, and they put the credentials into Cloud Foundry, and then they say, this is what to use. You bind to it as normal, but it's shared across every binding. The actual database table or Mongo collection or whatever is the thing that is shared multi-tenantly across all of the bindings. Isn't that correct?
Well, that is a use case, but that's basically the same use case as what I described, because in that case, the user, or the admin, created the MongoDB through some mechanism, right? Whether it's actually through Cloud Foundry or through some API directly to mongo.com or whatever, it doesn't matter. But then when they go off and create the user-provided service, they're telling Cloud Foundry what those credentials are.
Got it.
So it's basically the same thing.
How does it handle it if a second user-provided service is created? Does it use the same default plan ID?
There is no plan.
Okay.
Each user-provided service is completely independent because all it is a store to store credentials.
Okay, but since there is none, it's no longer a GUID there. It's just ignoring it.
It's no longer a GUID. I'm not. You mean for the plan?
Yeah.
Well, that's why I'm suggesting that we create a resource that doesn't have a plan field in it, because it doesn't make any sense in this use case.
Okay, makes sense.
So for user-provided services, do we even use OSB API at all, or do we just like have a manually created object?
It's basically all manual. You never go talk to a broker. So you're right. We never use the actual OSB API.
Okay.
So Doug, you're going to write up a more formal proposal for this?
I was going to wait until tomorrow just to make sure no one had a huge objection to at least considering the idea before I went through the work. But yeah, I'll wait till tomorrow. I'll do it.
I'm fairly dubious about being able to do this without adding a large amount of complexity relative to the return on investment. But I look forward to reading your proposal.
That's why I was going to take it slow. Yep.
Yeah, I wonder if it actually should be in the scope of service catalog, or just create your own PodPreset, create your secret manually, and just inject all the environment variables or whatnot.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because that actually might be the right solution. Yes, right. We may look at this and say, you know what, we don't even want to solve this use case via service broker concepts. It all depends on how we do, like, I think the PodPreset binding, right? Because that's almost outside the scope of our service catalog API anyway, right?
Yeah, that's a really valid point. I think the reason that it's part of the Cloud Foundry platform on which we're basing this is because Cloud Foundry is also a PaaS, and so they need this mechanism to be able to inject credentials into a running application in the PaaS, whereas we don't have that mechanism. We don't have a PaaS, and so I think that's a very astute observation that if all we're doing is making this whole extra object thing that then turns around and puts it in native Kubernetes resources, it may be a great idea to cut the middleman out there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the solution to this might be just drop the user-provided service concept entirely and say, you want that concept, go create a secret, create a PodPreset binding, and you're done.
Or just make a PodPreset.
That simplicity.
Yeah. So I'll work through the proposal and see how it feels, and we can then hash it out later. But this was a good discussion.
So we're at time now. I will put the default values of parameters on a namespace level thing into discussion for tomorrow. Thanks everybody for joining. See you all on the internet.